The Dark Secret of WEATHEREND by John Bellairs. Chapter 13. Anthony checked his arms and legs. To his surprise, he was not hurt. Then Mr. Johnson spoke. "That was dumb of me," he groaned. "I should have had my brakes checked. Boy, was I dumb." Miss Eels wrinkled up her nose and shook her head. "I think I've read this script before," she said sourly. "Between your bad brakes and my half-bald chainless tires, we make a great pair. I think we're all lucky to be alive." Anthony looked out at the snowy, windy night and saw a traffic light swaying wildly on its thick, black wire. Snow gusted around the dark buildings. All the stores were closed up, and there was no one to be seen anywhere. Anthony's heart sank. How were they ever going to get to the cemetery now? He wondered if Borkman had iced the streets just to keep them from getting there. Miss Eels started to talk, but her voice trailed off. She had seen and heard something outside. Now Anthony and Mr. Johnson heard it, a rising roar. Into the deserted intersection crawled a U.S. Army weapons carrier, a strange-looking contraption that was made to move around in the worst possible weather. It had been repainted in a blue and white colors of the Duluth Police Department, and it looked like a tank with its top half sawed off. Instead of wheels, it had a rotating cleated belt, and in the driver's seat was a policeman wearing a helmet and goggles. As they watched, the weapons carrier turned slightly and began crawling toward them. It stopped in front of the truck, and the policeman vaulted down from his seat. "Uh-oh, now we're going to get it," said Mr. Johnson as he rolled his window down. The policeman stopped below the window and glared up. In his gloved hands were a pencil and a ticket pad. "Gonna have to ticket you, friend," he growled. "No, it's bad weather, but you still should have had more control over your vehicle. You're from Wisconsin. What are you doing your truck down here anyway? They call you in to help plow the streets?" Mr. Johnson was just about to answer when Miss Eels cut in quickly. "Officer, this gentleman was on an errand of mercy. You see, our car broke down on the way to Duluth, and he gave us a ride. We'd have frozen to death out in the wilderness if it hadn't been for him." The policeman looked at Miss Eels. His eyes were hidden by the shiny polarized goggles, but his mouth was curved into a skeptical scowl. "Oh, yeah? Well, that was real nice of him, wasn't it? And may I ask where the heck you were going in this storm?" Miss Eels struggled to keep her self-control. "Officer," she said in a polite, sugary voice, "I am the sister of one of the nuns at St. Scholastica's College. She is dying, and I want to be with her. My nephew and I have been invited to spend the night at the college. Mr. Johnson was trying to take us there when his truck had an accident. Do you suppose you could take us?" Anthony gave Miss Eels an amused, sidelong glance. He had seen her do her imitation of a sweet, helpless little old lady before, and always enjoyed it. But would the cop fall for her line? The policeman took off his helmet. He did not look quite so grim and forbidding without it. "Look, lady," he said almost apologetically now, "we're in the middle of one of the weirdest storms I ever saw in my life. People are scared half out of their wits, and I don't blame them. I have to go up and down Main Street in this thing here and make sure that cars get moved and stores don't get broke into. St. Scholastica's is way up there. How am I going to patrol down here and take you up there, huh?" Miss Eels gave the cop her most pleading, round-eyed gaze. "Officer, it really is terribly important. We haven't got any other way out of getting here. And I'm sure that by now the sisters are frantic with worry. Please, please help us." The cop turned his helmet over in his hands and stared at his boots. Finally, with a deep, weary sigh, he jammed the helmet back onto his head and motioned for the three travelers to get out of the truck. Okay, I'll take you, but move it, will ya? I ain't got all night. I gotta get back on patrol." Miss Eels was delighted. She had won this round at any rate. Anthony scrambled out of the truck, clinging tightly to his tool bag, and she slid out after him. They both rushed over to the weapons carrier and climbed in. Mr. Johnson came loping across the snow after them. "Guess this is where we say goodbye," he drawled. "I'm gonna get a room at the Hotel Duluth for the night. No sense in trying to get back to my sister's place in all this snow. Tomorrow morning I'm gonna see about getting this crate of mine off that sidewalk." "You're gonna see about it earlier than that," said the cop irritably. "When you get to the hotel, call up a towing service, and then meet me back here in, I'd say about 20 minutes to half an hour. We'll get the old heap moving some way." "Goodbye, Mr. Johnson," Miss Eels called out, and she waved and smiled gratefully. "Thank you so much for everything." "Yeah, goodbye," said Anthony, and he waved too. "You were a real good friend to us, Mr. Johnson. Thanks a lot." Mr. Johnson grinned in his dopey way and ambled off into the darkness. The cop clambered up into the cockpit of the weapons carrier and started the engine. With a clattering of gears, the heavy tank-like vehicle began to move up the steep, icy streets. No one was outside, though the streetlights burned brightly and many windows glowed yellow in the dark. The wind whipped around the weapons carrier, and it stung Anthony's face. But the snow had let up. Anthony wondered if Borkman's magic had run out of steam. Or was it possible that he and Miss Eels were wrong? Was this just a natural storm that had nothing to do with Anders Borkman and the 4 weird statues? The weapons carrier crawled up more ice-coated streets toward the highest hill above the town, where St. Scholastica's College is located. Looming out of the darkness, Anthony saw big stone buildings with iron crosses perched on snow-covered roofs. The tall tower of a church rose into the dark sky. The vehicle rattled up a long, curving drive and stopped in front of a small pillared porch. Inside the vaulted roof, a wrought iron lantern with yellow glass panes hung, casting a pool of light over the snowy sidewalk. Anthony's heart beat faster. If somebody came out to see who was at the door, the cop would discover that Miss Eels had been lying to him. He glanced quickly at his friend and saw that her face was perfectly calm and composed. What a great poker player Miss Eels would make. "Well, here you are," said the cop grumpily. "Don't say I never did anything for you." Anthony swung himself over the side of the weapons carrier. Nimbly he picked his way down the iron rungs and jumped off onto the ground with Miss Eels following more slowly. Leaning down, the cop handed the tool bag to Anthony. "What you got in there anyway?" the cop asked with a grin. "Scrap iron? Old horse collars?" Miss Eels was flustered, but she managed to make a reply. It's a couple of holy statues with a sick call kit that used to belong to my late brother, who was a priest. We wanted to use them when Father Flaherty administers the last rites to my sister. We had some trouble packing them on top of our clothes. They do make a noise, don't they?" The cop stared at Miss Eels for a second. Then he laughed, waved goodbye, and the weapons carrier roared off. Miss Eels heaved a deep, heartfelt sigh of relief. "My Lord," she exclaimed, shaking her head. "I never thought he'd go away." Anthony gazed at her admiringly. "You did great," he said, beaming. Miss Eels smiled. "Let's move out of the light and get our bearings," she said. "We need to find out where that stupid cemetery is, and I'd rather not be here when the nun comes barging out the front door to ask us what we want." They stopped at a corner of the building where some light was pouring out of the window above their heads. Here they were sheltered from the wind by a small grove of cypress trees that grew next to the building. Anthony took out his penlight, and Miss Eels unbuttoned a pocket of her parka and dug out a wrinkled map of the buildings and grounds of St. Scholastica's College, which she had stolen from the Hoosac Library. "The cemetery is off that way," she whispered, pointing into the blackness. "It's right at the northern edge of the college ground. There's a hill to go down and another to climb to get to the cemetery. Come on, I want to get into that mausoleum and find whatever it is that we're supposed to find." Miss Eels and Anthony picked their way down the dark drive. The snow was ankle deep and hard to walk in, but they plodded doggedly on. "Down this way," Miss Eels hissed as she grabbed Anthony's arm. "Be careful. I don't know how steep this hill is, but it'll be slippery." Miss Eels unzipped the top of the tool bag, and after fumbling a bit, pulled out the flashlight. All around them now was pitch blackness. She played the beam of it on the ground, and saw that they were standing at the edge of a hill that dropped off sharply. Anthony stood staring down, and he swallowed hard. He would have to dig his heels in and throw his weight backward, but he figured he could make it. But how was Miss Eels going to manage? Shuffling cautiously to the edge, Anthony took one step, and then he was gone. With a loud yell, he disappeared into the darkness. Terrified, Miss Eels rushed to the edge and pointed her flashlight beam down. Then she laughed with relief. Anthony was sitting there with his legs splayed out in front of him. His red leather cap had slipped down over one eye, and he seemed a bit dazed, but otherwise okay. "Are you all in one piece, Tony?" Miss Eels called. I guess so. Only I don't know how you're going to get down here. There's ice over the top of the snow, and it's real hard." Miss Eels dropped to her knees, reached out, and tapped the icy surface with the butt of the flashlight. Yes, it was as smooth as glass. She stood up, picked up the tool bag, and gave it a heave over the edge. Then, with a brave smile on her face, she took off her glasses, put them in a pocket of her parka, and set the flashlight down on the ground. She nudged it with her foot and watched it roll down the hill, still lit and sending out a long, wobbly beam. Now Miss Eels lay down on her side and gave herself a heave. Over and over she went, down the icy hillside. It was so dark at the bottom that Anthony could not see where she had landed, but then he heard a loud, cheerful exclamation. "Well, that was fun, wasn't it? Now, where is that flash? Ah, here it is." They scrambled to their feet, found the tool bag, and started across the slippery, ice-covered snow. Ahead was a flight of icy stone steps that rose into the night. Miss Eels played the flashlight beam before them as they carefully climbed. Finally, they reached the top. A low stone wall with a stone arch surrounded the cemetery. Atop the arch was a statue of St. Boniface, dressed as a bishop. Icicles hung from his crosier and outstretched hand. There was a wrought iron gate, but no padlock. Miss Eels and Anthony shoved the gate open and walked forward through the glimmering tombstones. At the top of a slight rise stood the Borkman Mausoleum, a gloomy granite house with tiny slit-like windows. Two marble sphinxes crouched in front of the mausoleum, and two Egyptian pillars with lotus capitals held up the massive carved cornice. In the center of the cornice was a carved hourglass with wings, and above it the name Borkman. Between the pillars were bronze doors, which had tarnished to a bright green color. On the doors, sculpted in relief, were the upside-down torches that the article had mentioned. "So, here we are," said Miss Eels softly. She could not hide the tremor in her voice. "I've never desecrated a tomb before. What do you suppose we'll find inside?" Anthony said nothing. He looked around nervously. The tombstones were like small white creatures crouched in the darkness, peering at him. The wind had died, and everything lay still. He could hear the blood roaring in his ears, and he felt his hands tremble. He was half scared out of his wits. Silently, the two moved forward. Anthony set the tool bag down in front of the mausoleum. Then, while Miss Eels held the flashlight, he took a long crowbar and inserted the curved, forked tip into the crack between the two doors. At first, nothing happened, but Anthony kept prying, and soon the metal shrieked and groaned. Anthony struggled as he worked the end of the crowbar deeper into the crack. He stiffened his back, planted his feet, and shoved mightily. Finally, the metal gave way with a loud crack like a pistol shot, and one of the doors flew outward. Anthony stepped back. He half expected that shadowy arms would reach out and drag him inside, but nothing happened. Inside the tomb it was dark and still. From the half-ajar door, a musty smell drifted out. Miss Eels walked forward, moving the flashlight beam around the opening as Anthony crowded in next to her to look. They saw a tiled wall and a terrazzo pavement decorated in spirally patterns. Overhead, from the vaulted stone ceiling, hung a rusty iron lantern with a burnt-out light bulb in its socket. But there was no coffin. It was totally empty.